Good Shabbos, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. As the Baal Turim points out, and many others, this is the first parsha since Moshe Rabbeinu was born, since Moses was born, that does not have Moses' name in the parsha. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains, Alpi Chassidus, that the answer to that, and the commentaries, the answer to that comes from next week's parsha. So in next week's parsha, which is always read right around Purim, either before or after Purim, we have the idea, we have the parsha of the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, which is the greatest sin probably that we as a Jewish people did in history. We made a golden calf and prayed to the golden calf. And when Moshe Rabbeinu goes to defend us and he fights with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe Rabbeinu argues with Hashem and says, and if you will not forgive the Jewish people, then mecheini na misifrecha shekatavta, then erase me from this, from the Sefer Torah, erase me from the Torah, erase my name. And the idea is that the words of a tzaddik are fulfilled always in some way. And where did Hashem erase his name from? From this week's parsha. And there's 4 or 5 times where the word ve'ata comes out, where Hashem is speaking to Moses, and he doesn't call Moses by name, usually how it appears elsewhere in the Torah. But he says, and you, Y-O-U, you, ve'ata. So Moses' name was erased basically from one piece of the Torah, which is this parsha, and it's very strange. Every parsha has Moshe's name since he was born, except for this parsha. Wonderful. So Lubavitcher Rebbe explains the following idea. Explains 2 things. Moshe Rabbeinu, and there's many sources that point to this, was one with the Torah itself. But there's also other sources that point to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was one with the Jewish people. And when it came to push and shove, Moshe Rabbeinu chose to be connected to the Jewish people. He was the Raya Mehemna. He was the faithful shepherd of the Jewish people. He cared so much about his fellow Jew. And he says, there's basically no point in me being in the Torah if I'm going to be separate from the Jewish people, if we're going to have a new Jewish people. There's going to be a new chosen people. So it's an interesting debate between Hashem and Moshe, where Moshe puts his foot down and basically establishes, this is how the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains it in the Sichas, that his love for the Jewish people is so great. Moshe's love for the Jewish people is so great that he was willing to be erased from the Torah. He was willing to separate himself from that historic ethical reality. And that really is a paradigm for Mesirut Nefesh and Ahavat Yisrael, self-sacrifice and love of our fellow Jew. It's so fundamentally important for us to love our fellow Jew. Loving our fellow Jew, the Rebbe also explained in the beginning of his leadership, is the same thing as loving Hashem, and it's the same thing as loving the Torah. Those are all the same thing. And we have to love our fellow Jews. And that was shown to us in Moshe Rabbeinu's example, and that's why his name does not appear in this week's parsha. Now, as we know, and there's a deep tradition in sources for the idea that the parsha of the week is relevant to that time period. And usually these parshas happen right around Purim. What is the connection between Purim and between these parshas? Tetzaveh, Kitisa. And the answer is, if you look in the Megillat Esther, right before the biggest heroine moment of Queen Esther, Mordechai and Queen Esther are having conversation. And Mordechai says to Queen Esther, Im hacharish tacharishi, if you remain silent and don't do anything about this right now, about saving the Jewish people, about this edict of Haman to completely genocide and kill all the Jewish people, if you remain silent, relief and salvation will come to the Jewish people from a different place. Maybe your descendants will not be Jews, maybe you will also be lost, but don't worry about the Jews. Like Hashem promised the Jews that the Jews will be the chosen people forever. But you have permission. You have permission to act right now and to be part of the Jewish nation and to play your role. The eternal people of the eternal Torah. And then Esther says, fine, I'm going to go to King Achashverosh for my own free will. And she was very scared because avadati, she was afraid of doing transgressions of the Torah. And there's a lot to say there. I released it's a 50-minute shir on another video where you could watch and understand. The sources are all there in front of you. Or you could understand Queen Esther's halachic struggles and what she was thinking about. But she basically has her hero moment, and she says, Im avadati. She says, if I'm going to be lost, I'm willing to sacrifice myself to save the Jewish people. And that was true self-sacrifice. Going into a foreign palace, marrying a foreign, non-Jewish king, basically. Initially, she was taken against her will, but eventually, there was one moment, if you look in the Megillah, that she goes from her own free will. You have to look at in the shir that I posted. It's called Queen Esther's Struggles, posted under that. The Purim queen who followed halacha. So anyways, so that's how that is. The message of this week's parsha is we have to love our fellow Jews, even to the extent of complete and utter self-sacrifice. And that's the same thing as loving Hashem and loving the Torah. But first and foremost, you have to love our fellow Jews. Have a wonderful Shabbos, and I'll see you guys all on the next side.